everybody, Ty here. Apologies for this video coming up a day late. The outlook took a little longer than expected to be released, along with a little bit of additional model data here to go with it. So it's kind of been an uphill battle trying to get this one out, but rest assured we're here finally. And funny thing to make note of is, for all of that waiting, there have been some minute changes, but it's not too dissimilar from the last February outlook we went over in regards to the maps here. So these are official maps from the CPC, by the way. And what you can see here is, for the most part, over towards the northern states, northwest is where those below average temperatures are going to be most likely throughout the month. Now keep in mind, as we go through this outlook here, these are going over 30-day averages here. So not every day is going to be super cold or super hot, but there's going to be an increased amount of days where we're going to be dealing with above or below average temperatures, which will ultimately result in the probability that you're seeing on the screen now. Same thing goes with the precipitation maps. But in any case, though, not much of a surprise seeing what we're seeing here over towards the northwest here. Anticipating the below average temperature pattern here, we pointed out the fact that we've been trending towards the negative PNA that we ultimately have ended up in towards the very end of January here and heading into February. Also, we were saying the same thing about the northern states. There has been a little bit of an adjustment, though. There is a slight push further to the south here, so we're looking at Nebraska starting to get into the bottom end of those below average temp probabilities. In regards to the above average temperatures, we've seen a little bit of a shift there too. That one's a little bit more significant. A lot more of the northeastern states are starting to get to the bottom end of those above average temperature probabilities now. And then there's also increased confidence of above average temperatures towards South Georgia, Southern Alabama, South Carolina, and Florida here. We're now getting into that 60 to 70 percentile range, whereas before we were more, I would say, in this reddish orange color, which is 50 to 60, where over towards the southwest, slight little increase in temperature confidence here as well. We're in the 50 to 60 now, whereas before we were in the 40 to 50 range. So not much has changed outside of that. Just a slight little push as well of those above average temperatures a little further off towards the north. It's starting to encompass most of the Ohio Valley at this point as well. Over towards Alaska, not a whole lot has changed, just a couple of minute tweaks here. Maybe a little bit more of a warm push to the south here, and then off towards the southeast here, we're still seeing those below average temperature chances, which usually correlates to what you see on the northwestern side of the U.S. as well. So as we go over towards the precip outlooks, there's actually been quite an increase in confidence in precipitation or activity over here towards the western half of the U.S. Not really surprising. The trend has been showing a really strong signal, especially for this next week over towards the region here. A lot of rain, a lot of snow showers, a lot of mountain snow expected towards this region here, so not much of a surprise here. As far as the precipitation shield that we're seeing over here towards the Ohio Valley, not a whole lot has changed. In fact, if anything, there's been a slight increase in confidence there. As you can see with this darker shade of green here, we're now getting into the 50 to 60 percentile range there. But outside of that, not much has changed. Maybe a little bit of an increase in width for the entire area in regards to the above average precip probabilities. And the same thing kind of goes for the below average precip probabilities out towards the southwest. It almost looks exactly the same as what we saw in the last outlook. Over towards the southern part of Florida, we've had a slight little increase in below average precip. A lot of that's going to have to do with the fact that the storm tracks are going to end up being mostly off to the north here, and there's not going to be much in the way of like surface lows heading into the Gulf here at this point to kind of kickstart any shower or thunderstorm activity. Always got to have a forcing mechanism of some kind. And pretty much for Alaska, it's the same exact deal that we had with the previous February outlook, minus a couple of changes here. Just a tiny little bit of an extension of that area of above average precip chances, mainly kind of staying towards the bottom end here. Interesting thing to make note of here, even though we saw this in the last outlook, but you do see this below average precip probability over here towards the southwest eastern part of the state. So large part of what we're dealing with is due to the fact that we're still, of course, in our La Nina setup here. There's actually a La Nina advisory that's been put in effect here by the CPC, and I would anticipate that to continue into March. Usually during this time of year with La Ninas, we often get some pretty active storm tracks. Also, off towards the southern part of the U.S., southern half of the U.S. tends to be a bit warmer, also a bit more moist. So I do anticipate the typical La Nina pattern to continue at this point. Really, what I would say as far as January is concerned, it was quite anomalous here. Usually what we'll get is usually kind of what we're getting now in January as well, but obviously we didn't have that happen. So always have to stay alert, and as I mentioned before, even though we're looking at the outlook here, this is over a 30-day average, and you're going to see in just a little bit why I'm telling you that the temperature and the precip outlooks are not a guarantee as to what you will see. So one thing to make note of here, and we're looking at the oscillations since we're at the very beginning of February, and this is why I always make the follow-up video, is that I can now look at this day to day, whereas before, towards, let's say, the middle of January, I would not be able to use this. So if we keep this moving here, what two areas I want you to pay attention to is not actually going to be over the US. It's going to be over towards the North Pole. It's going to be over towards Greenland. There's two oscillations there that we watch. There's the Arctic oscillation and the North Atlantic oscillation. And you'll kind of see what I'm talking about as I'm moving this along here. When we see these areas in the blue, these are in the negative phases. Usually when that happens, a lot of cold air will move in. And as you see, Arctic oscillation and the North Atlantic oscillation, or the AO and NAO, when they're negative, you can see that cold air starting to swirl about more in Canada and sneaking its way into the northern states. And we predominantly remain in a negative phase with both of these regions until late. We do start to sneak into an early positive phase. And with that, you can see a nice little push of cold air begin to occur again over towards the northeast before warm air would start to kick back in. Then when we go back negative, kicks this warm air out, and then there's cold air coming in to replace that as we go further along here. The other thing to make note of here, and this is also why I like looking at this map here, these blue areas do not only just represent cold air masses, they also present areas of low pressure. So the thing to make note of here, and I'm going to rewind this back, is that you see a lot of activity again over towards the northwest. Then eventually, as we go further along here, you can see the warm air begin to build up out towards the east. So a lot of ridging expected to occur. You can actually even see the southeast ridge over here towards this region where I'm pointing now. Now as we go further along here, especially as we get towards the 17th through the 22nd time frame here, you can actually see that cold air beginning to march back out towards the east. So we get a pretty big flip here, it looks like, as we get towards the middle to back half of the month here. Again, at this range, 468 hours, anything can change here, but it's a very interesting setup that I'm seeing coming into play here. Also, warm air rushes back in to replace that, and then this trough right here definitely has me leery of potential severe weather to maybe close out the month. Like I said, as of right now, I'm not gonna feed into that too much, but this look definitely is interesting to me. There's no real signal that I can go off of yet, or even a trend at this point. This is the only model that I can use right now, so at this range. So I'm a little skeptical as to what happens next here, and then even more skeptical of this look here. This looks absolutely crazy, but if that does come into play, Old Man Winter may not be done just yet in regards to the eastern half of the US. So we'll have to keep an extra close eye on this month, because as I was saying in the last outlook, this does look like it has all the makings of a very dynamic month, where even though we would be slated to be above average in a lot of areas and below average in others, you could have a couple of days or maybe even a week in total where that kind of gets flipped on its head. And you can kind of see a good reflection of this on the temperatures here. I would say in this case, since we're looking into extremely long range here, ignore the values, but just kind of look at how the colors are going. You can see the literal warm colors right here in this case. This is what I want you to pay attention to, and then also the cold colors. Just look at how they're shifting at this point. So as you can see here, especially through the first week or so, it's going to be cold out towards the west, warm out towards the east. Classic example of a negative PNA pattern here. So the first half of the month, definitely kind of have some confidence in regards to what to expect there. Now as we go further along here, you can start to see that cold air beginning to shift southward and push its way off to the east here. By the time we get past mid-month into the 17th to 22nd time frame, that's when we start to see a pretty big cold push here. Now again, this is one of the few models that can reach out to this range, so I don't have much to compare this up against. But this is a pretty crazy look here as we get into the middle of February. So could get interesting if that does pan out. Again, at this range though, not going to put a whole lot of merit into it. Then as we go further along, especially as we get towards the back half of the month, one thing that you'll notice here is a pretty big warm sector pops up here as well. And then right behind it, there's more cold air. So like I said, definitely has the look of a very dynamic setup if that indeed does verify. But obviously the range can't really even make any sort of real speculation or forecast at this point. And then also towards the very end of the month, heading into February, seeing that big trough coming in, bringing in that cold air, also kind of leads me to wonder if we really are just done with winter just yet over towards the eastern half of the U.S., especially towards the south. That probably might be a little bit triggering to some, but I'm here to tell you the truth. I'm not necessarily here to make you happy, not to be rude, but at the same time though, I'm trying to tell you what's going on. But in any case though, this is kind of a teaser here, obviously. Really, it's more or less a formality at this point. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at the preset map here. And one thing that we can definitely verify at this point is towards the northern states, northwestern states is where the most action is going to be in regards to winter weather. A little further off towards the south, our rain chances increase. And we see some pretty good signal of that, especially within the first 10 days. So confidence in this is palpable. Now, as we go further along here, this is where things become a bit more questionable. Now, obviously, we're going to be close to being like on the edge of a potentially getting into like the GFS and the Euro within the next week or so. So we'll be able to gain some kind of clarity to some of these looks that we have right now and see if they're actual signals or not at this time. But like I said, that 17th to 22nd time frame definitely is a time frame that's interesting to me, especially for the southern half of the U.S. As you can see, still plenty of action over towards the northeast, even though we're expected to be above average here. So don't, just because you have above average temperatures towards the northeast, don't expect to not see some chances for snow here and there. But as you can see, very dynamic 28 to 30 plus day period ahead here for the lower 48. So going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out. Hope that you will tune in and see that in the upcoming future here. Best way to do that, of course, hit that like button. Also get that notification bell on to know every time that we post. But I will see you guys in the next one. Until then, you all take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.